BRICS has become a real threat to the dollar. Donald Trump's response to the just-concluded BRICS 2025 summit was harsh. Yet for some reason this is not being widely discussed. That is no coincidence. What's happening directly challenges Western dominance, and those in power do not want the world to know, but some are paying close attention. America's wealthiest elites. Behind closed doors, they are already sounding the alarm. Why? Because with each new BRICS summit, the dollar's position grows weaker. Billionaires, investors, former officials, all are warning a financial reset is coming. And Trump understands this too. That is why he went on the offensive, threatening BRICS countries and even warning U.S. allies. If you support BRICS, you will face the consequences. So why is Trump so fixated on this bloc? Why the threats, the tariffs, the ultimatums? The truth runs much deeper. The global economic order is changing and it is changing fast. So, let's break it down. The BRICS summit in 2025 was not just a diplomatic gathering, it was a bold statement. The global South is no longer willing to play by the West's rules. In a joint declaration, BRICS leaders called for a multipolar world, one in which power is not concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy nations, but distributed across regions and systems. This is no longer theoretical. BRICS now represents 46% of the world's population and 35% of global GDP, more than the G7. With Indonesia joining as the first Southeast Asian country and new partners like Nigeria, Vietnam, and Malaysia on board, BRICS is expanding rapidly, especially in regions long eager to have a voice in global politics. So why is Western media silent on this? Because it doesn't fit the usual narrative. In the press, BRICS is often portrayed as a bloc that's just too divided to agree on anything meaningful. But the summit actually proved the opposite. Despite these enormous differences, from Indian democracy to Chinese authoritarianism, the bloc managed to agree on key issues, at least for now. This unity is hard to ignore and even harder to explain. Take the International Monetary Fund. The United States and its allies maintain disproportionate control. BRICS countries hold only 18.5% of voting power, which is less than 5 Western European states, who together control more than 19%. The U.S. alone holds 16.5%, meaning nothing passes without Washington's approval. Simply put, the IMF and World Bank are really tools of American influence. That's why BRICS is building alternatives. The new development bank and the reserve pool are already lending and providing financial support, and they're doing it without political conditions or pressure. Yes, the transition is slow. Brazil and India prefer reforming the old system while Russia and China want a full break from the West. This creates internal divisions. But despite these differences, the message from Rio was clear. BRICS will no longer wait for permission. The reset has already begun. At the summit, the bloc issued direct criticism of the United States, condemning tariffs and sanctions as tools of coercion used by the West to maintain global leadership. The declaration used no diplomatic euphemisms, and Trump did not hold back either. He clearly sensed the threat and responded once again with threats. It wasn't the first time. In 2024, right after his re-election, Trump promised to impose 100% tariffs if BRICS challenged the dollar. Now he talks about 10%. This rhetorical softening says a lot. The strategy is losing power and the opponent is gaining strength. Trump's words have become almost routine. He repeats the same threats, but the world is no longer listening. Behind the repetition lies fear. Fear that BRICS might actually succeed. And to understand why, just look at the numbers. The expanded BRICS now includes Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and Indonesia. Together, they form the world's largest economic bloc by purchasing power parity, overtaking the G7 and reshaping global trade flows. Their new development bank has already invested $33 billion United States dollars in infrastructure and development, giving countries an escape from the control of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, both of which remain under Western influence. But that is not all. BRICS is actively developing BRICS Pay, an alternative to the SWIFT system and increasing trade volumes in national currencies. Today, the United States dollar is involved in 88% of all global transactions, and even a partial shift away from it could have serious consequences. And this is no longer just theory. At the summit itself, BRICS leaders finally received a long-awaited technical report with a step-by-step roadmap for de-dollarization. Meanwhile, Trump went back on the offensive. In a July 7th post on Truth Social, he accused BRICS of pursuing anti-American policies, but did not clarify what exactly he meant. Criticism of American tariffs, refusal to recognize unilateral sanctions, or condemnation of US and Israeli strikes on Iran. This vagueness points to something else: fear of losing control. Right now, the US dollar still makes up 58% of global currency reserves. If BRICS countries unite and accelerate the shift away from the dollar, the consequences for the United States could be severe. Weakened financial influence and higher domestic borrowing costs. The irony is that Trump's own policies may only make things worse. Economists warned that 100% tariffs would drive up prices, fuel inflation, and slow the economy, hitting American families harder than BRICS countries. While Trump tries to isolate BRICS, the bloc keeps expanding. Over 30 countries, including Malaysia and Thailand, are now lining up to join. Brazil's President Lula put it bluntly: the world doesn't need an emperor. The old rules no longer work, and BRICS will not back down. But this is not just about trade. BRICS also stood against sanctions imposed without United Nations approval, like those from the United States against Iran and Russia. The bloc calls such measures violations of sovereignty and human rights and is building its own alternatives in response. This is where the talk of a reset becomes reality. If BRICS succeeds in building a viable financial system outside of the dollar, it could fundamentally transform the global economy. But wait, it gets even more interesting. Let's shift focus to Southeast Asia. The BRICS 2025 summit was not just a meeting of member states, it was a tectonic shift in global geopolitics. With Southeast Asia stepping onto the BRICS stage, Indonesia's full membership and new partnerships with Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, the bloc has gained a powerful new engine and caught the West off guard. This region is no secondary player. With a gross domestic product of $3.5 trillion United States dollars and a population of 670 million, Southeast Asia is, honestly, one of the world's most vital economic hubs. It produces semiconductors for Intel, smartphones for Samsung, and clothing for Nike. The region accounts for about 24% of all American imports in high-tech and consumer goods. For years, the United States saw Southeast Asia as the main destination for relocating manufacturing from China, betting on ASEAN to contain Beijing's rise. But now, with BRICS expanding into this region, that strategy is, well, falling apart. The U.S. is finding itself isolated with no suitable replacement in sight. Southeast Asia's role in global trade cannot be overstated. So it's actually the fourth largest export region in the world, and Vietnam alone supplies more than 4% of United States imports. In 2024, the World Trade Organization valued Vietnam's external trade at $200 billion United States dollars. Proximity to China, a skilled labor force, and low cost made Vietnam a priority for companies fleeing China's geopolitical risks. But, well, Washington miscalculated. On the very first day of his second term, Trump canceled the Indo-Pacific Economic Initiative and imposed tariffs, 32% on Indonesian goods and 40% on Vietnamese goods. These countries did not sit idly by. Instead, they turned to BRICS. Leaders like PBO from Indonesia and Anwar from Malaysia, weary of the United States' economic bullying, sought support from the New Development Bank and the BRICS pay system. These instruments have already issued $33 billion United States dollars and now serve as alternatives to SWIFT. With Southeast Asia now involved, BRICS encompasses nearly half of the developing world's manufacturing capacity, forming a viable counterweight to Western supply chains, and, well, the United States is running out of options. Africa, burdened with broken infrastructure and a $50 billion deficit, just can't compete with Asia, especially considering that China spends $22 billion more there than the US. Europe suffers from expensive energy and, an aging population. South America is overly reliant on raw materials and simply cannot position itself as a tech manufacturing hub. While BRICS prepares to admit up to 30 new countries, including resource-rich Nigeria and Algeria, its influence in trade and energy just keeps on growing. And what about Trump? He seems to be shouting into the void with no new allies, unreliable partners, and a world that's increasingly shaped by the BRICS agenda. But not everything inside the bloc is smooth either. In 2025, Malaysia chairs ASEAN and finds itself in a difficult position. It must navigate between BRICS's rising influence and tensions in the South China Sea. For many countries in the region, joining BRICS is not about abandoning the West. It's about having options. It's not about replacing one dominant force with another, but about gaining flexibility. It's not a full alliance, but a strategic insurance policy. These countries want the freedom to say no to Washington or to Beijing if necessary. It's precisely this kind of multipolar diplomacy that is quietly and steadily rewriting the global rulebook. The BRICS summit in Rio unveiled a bold vision of the future, a world where the West no longer dominates and the global South determines its own destiny. The final declaration called for sweeping reforms from restructuring the World Trade Organization to creating alternative financial systems and defending the sovereignty of developing nations. At first glance, it looks like a blueprint for a global economic reset. But let's be honest, BRICS is not a monolith. Internal contradictions are growing too. As recently as April 2025, the bloc's foreign ministers failed to agree on a joint statement, a clear sign of disagreements. Brazil and India advocate reforming existing institutions while China and Russia push for a radical overhaul. This is a fundamental divergence in strategy. Even the absence of Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin at the summit only fueled speculation about tension within the bloc. And there are also practical hurdles. Yes, the new development bank has approved $33 billion in loans, but that is just a drop in the ocean compared to the World Bank's portfolio of $350 billion. Projects like BRICS Pay and national currency settlement sound promising, but they still face technical and organizational challenges before they can reach full capacity. And despite all the talk about de-dollarization, the United States dollar remains the foundation of global finance. And that foundation will not be easily shaken. The irony is that Trump's aggressive foreign policy seems to be accelerating the very changes he fears most. His threats and ultimatums are pushing more and more countries toward independence from the dollar. And honestly, they are finding that independence in BRICS. Trump is trying to freeze the world in place, but history is already in motion and BRICS is riding the wave of change. The battle for global economic leadership is far from over. But one thing is already clear. This time, BRICS is not just defending itself. It is going on the offensive. So, if you want to stay informed about global shifts, make sure to subscribe because the next chapter of history is already beginning.